Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. Excellent. Okay, welcome to the 32nd Annual Environment Virginia Conference. Some of you were here yesterday. Welcome back. Some of you just joined us today. We've got a great two-day program for you with lots of great content, some great discussions, and some great networking over the next 2 days. So, although we started yesterday with a superb environmental awards program and had our first block of sessions, today we would like to start the conference in our traditional way, which is with the posting of our national colors and the playing of our national anthem. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you would please rise. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Could we give a round of applause to the Color Guard and the Herald Trumpets, please? So, ladies and gentlemen, it's now my great pleasure to introduce Virginia Military Institute's 15th Superintendent, Major General Cedric Wins. General Wins is a 1985 VMI graduate who commissioned in the United States Army in the Field Artillery Branch. During his distinguished 34-year Army career, General Wins served in many key leadership and staff assignments, including duties at the Headquarters Department of the Army and on the Joint Staff in the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. In his final command, Major General Wins served as the first commanding general of the U.S. Army Combat Capabilities Development Command. He has earned Bachelor of Arts degrees in economics and 2 master's degrees in management and national security and strategic studies from the Florida Institute of Technology and the National War College, respectively. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Major General Wins.
Good morning, and welcome back to the Virginia Military Institute. We are excited to have you here and glad to have you here for the 32nd Annual Environment Virginia Symposium. This conference originated with a VMI civil engineer by the name of Captain Ron Urkel and has been hosted by the Institute every year since. It has grown from a small research grant presentation to the statewide event that we enjoy today. VMI is proud to host, along with the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, the Virginia Department of Forestry, and the Virginia Department of Environmental Endowment. We are pleased to be back in person for this conference after we had to hold it virtually last year. As you all know, the Environment Virginia Symposium has its own personality, and a great part of its appeal is the time that is set aside for you all to have the opportunity to network in person. In terms of professional development, this event is known for inviting a free exchange of ideas and knowledge between individuals, businesses, government agencies, and nonprofits for the greater environment good. In addition to the breakout sessions this morning, you will hear from the agency heads of our co-hosts, DEQ, DCR, and the Department of Forestry, each of whom is a long-time attendee at this conference. I'd also like to acknowledge Travis Voiles, the newly appointed Acting Secretary of Natural and Historic Resources, who is attending this conference for the very first time. Sir, if you could stand so we could acknowledge you, I'd appreciate it. And tomorrow we are pleased to host Brenda Mallory, the chair of the White House's Council on Environmental Quality. At VMI, we are extremely proud of our environmental programs in the sciences and engineering, which are a part of our long tradition of environmental conscientiousness for the Commonwealth and beyond. On behalf of the faculty, the staff, and our VMI cadets here, I want to extend to each and every one of you a very warm welcome. Thank you and enjoy the conference.
Thank you, General Wins, for that great opening remarks. Now, before we get started with our first panel, I'd like to acknowledge our statewide Program Advisory Committee. These are environmental professionals who come from government, nonprofits, the academic world, and business and industry who actually help us develop the content over the course of the year. They get to start on Friday. For the conference. We rely greatly on their expertise to help us bring a range of topics and a variety of diverse viewpoints about those topics to this conference. Will the members of our Program Advisory Committee, don't be shy, stand up and please be recognized? All of you out there, you're shy, please stand up. We really do appreciate your hard work over the course of the year. Now, this conference is special because of the participation of our other exhibitors, sponsors, and you, the participants. Now, some of you are new to the conference. If you're new to the conference, please stand up. If this is your first time, please stand up. We want to take a gut check. Yeah, great. Well, welcome. I look forward to seeing you next year. Now, there are a lot of stalwarts out there, even though we haven't seen each other than over Zoom the last 18 months or so. So how about somebody who's been here for the last 10 years? Please stand up. There's a couple in the back, a couple there. All right, excellent. Stand up, don't be shy. Okay. How about somebody who's been here for 15 years? Yep, there's a couple. Same faces, great. Okay, we're going to stretch. 25 years. Okay, same couple. Okay, we're going to find out in a moment who's been here the longest, but I'll save that. But really, folks, this has been like a reunion starting yesterday, and there'll be plenty more opportunities over the next 2 days to continue that reunion and to network and to learn a little bit more about our environment. So I want to thank you up front for your active participation for this conference. It really means a lot for the Commonwealth's environment. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to bring you our keynote session. We know that with the change of administrations in Richmond, we have some new folks who are leading our environmental agencies in the Commonwealth. And I'm pleased to say that all of them are longtime attendees at this conference, and 2 of them have been on the program advisory committee. So we want to introduce them to you and have asked them to share their vision for their departments moving forward. And I can't think of a better person, we couldn't collectively, to moderate this session than Mr. Russ Baxter, who I believe is the only person who has attended all 32 years of this conference. Russ is also a past recipient of our Urschel Environmental Leadership Award. He recently retired, so he tells me, from the Department of Conservation and Recreation on the 1st of September 2021 after a very long and distinguished career in natural resources management and policy, primarily in the state government. Among other positions, he previously served as Assistant Secretary of Natural Resources, Acting Director of the Department of Conservation and Recreation, Virginia Director of the Chesapeake Bay Commission. In addition, he served as Deputy Secretary of Natural Resources and for a short time, Secretary of Natural Resources during the McAuliffe administration. A native of Columbus, Ohio, go Bucks, Russ holds a bachelor's degree from Oberlin College in Oberlin, Ohio, and a master's from the University of Virginia. Russ and his great wife Sharon have lived, who is also a member of DEQ and a member of our program advisory committee, thank you Sharon, have lived in Richmond's Museum District for 32 years, and they have 2 grown sons. Now, Russ, I know you retired last year, but we couldn't let you break this perfect streak of attendance. So thank you for coming back. Ladies and gentlemen, please greet Russ Baxter.
Good morning, everyone. As many of you know, I've based my career on the teachings of Michael Corleone. And one of my favorite lines is, I tried to get out, but they pulled me back in. Well, it's certainly a pleasure to be here and to see so many familiar faces, and I was happy to see the folks that hadn't been here before, a new generation, so to speak, coming to this conference, because it is an integral part of the work that we do in Virginia, and always a pleasure to come to Lexington and to come to VMI in the spring. So certainly very happy to be here. I know Captain Urschel is looking down and just pleased that this event continues year after year, and we learn about each other and we learn about the issues. And so it's just very heartening to be back here once again. I would just also note that we lost in the last year, since we've been here together, a giant in Virginia conservation, the Honorable Taylor Murphy, who passed away last fall. And I know many of us are here because of Taylor, because of the work that he did and the foundations that he set for environmental protection in Virginia. So I hope we would just take a moment to think about Taylor as we attend this conference and again, try to move Virginia forward. We have three distinguished panelists today. I've been in this situation. Of course, Rob's an old hand, so he doesn't have to worry about it. He doesn't care about changes of administration when he's still hanging around. So I'll ask the gentlemen on the panel to come on up, Matt, Mike, and Rob, and I'll introduce them and we'll get started. Gentlemen, I'll get out of your way first. I would call your attention to page 15 of the, since we don't have a lot of time today, and I think you'd probably rather hear about what they're going to do than what they've done. I would encourage you to look at the bios. None of these gentlemen are strangers to the folks, to many of the folks in this audience. I've known Mike for
32 years.
32 years, something like that. Rob, of course, is well known. Matt, I don't know as well, but I've known him before he took this position, and congratulate him on the stewardship at DCR. So what we'd like to do today is just, I'm going to pose a question to each of the panelists. We don't have a great deal of time. We'd like to have them talk to you about what their hopes and dreams are as for the coming administration. But first, now that I'm retired, I can ask any hard-hitting, difficult question, and I don't have to go back home and answer to anybody. So, Rob.
I used to like you.
What's your favorite tree?
This has been discussed a lot. It's sycamore. Come on.
No, those are terrible to climb. White oak. It's got to be white oak. Come on.
There we have it, ladies and gentlemen. I hope they're members of the press here.
Rob, you gotta say dogwood.
Yeah, they're nice.
Well, I'm going to start off with Mike, only be out of seniority. Mike, you've had a good deal of experience, obviously, working with governmental regulators in your previous life, leading wetland studies and some of the other work that you've done. If you could take a moment, and I know you had the opportunity yesterday in the DEQ panel to talk a little bit about some of the key issues that the agency is facing, but I'm wondering if you might think a little bit about what your experience has been interacting with governmental agencies, what you've learned from that, and what you might bring to DEQ based on that experience, and how you sort of hope to, I wouldn't want to say shape DEQ in your image, but again, serve DEQ in the best way that you think possible.
Okay. Well, first of all, just so you know, Russ and I are the last people standing from a committee that started in 1990 trying to define the resource protection area. And they're still debating that. But number one is we need people at DEQ. So I mentioned yesterday, there's 75 openings. And there'll be more as retirements occur. They have great benefits, and it's a great place. And seriously, dealing with, my record on one permit in my life was 14 agencies, okay? And theoretically, I think you can get to 16. But DEQ has always impressed me as an agency that was more responsive and more understanding of what the regulated public needs, as well as the public and the community they're trying to protect. And I think what I want to do, and I mentioned yesterday in a lot more detail, is try to improve how we're providing these services. And about 60 to 80% of all the complaints in the last 2 months, for example, were stormwater. And the problem stems from not ever taking the time and investing in creating a new manual that follows the current regulations that we have in place. It's a major lift. So we have 5 manuals, and they're all slightly conflicting, and they don't, except for one, they were all published before the regulations that we use were published. So that's probably the biggest thing that we need to do at DEQ is pull it all together and be consistent in how we apply these rules and regulations to, number one, better protect the public, but also to make it better for the regulators themselves, trying to figure out what to do, and make it easier for permittees to apply for these permits and to design their projects. I think that's probably the biggest thing that we're going to be able to do. The other thing is it affects every program, and I understand now that it's going to be, DEQ is becoming the pilot project for other departments, and that's I call it our PEEP program, and if you want some peeps, there's still more out back at our booth. But seriously, one of the biggest complaints from people that apply for permits and communities and public sector, or the public in general, that are concerned about projects is where does the project stand in the permit process? And so what we're trying to do is become transparent and communicate where these projects are in that process. So our goal is to have an online critical path schedule that anybody can see where that project is in the approval process. And I think that will help to better communication, it'll help to better understandings and education, and the public and the permittees themselves will be able to communicate better with DEQ and all the other agencies that touch a permit. Because that's the other aspect of our programs. A lot of them are not just DEQ. We have input and comments from every regulatory authority at the federal and state and sometimes local level, and we need to have that all available for everybody.
Thanks, Mike. I know you've got some other things to talk about, but I'll come back to you after we give everybody a sort of their opening statement, so to speak. Rob, while forestry isn't in the Natural Resource Secretariat, and that always pained me to no end, but anyway, your agency has been a key player in the Chesapeake Bay watershed implementation plan, other water quality initiatives that aren't related to the Chesapeake Bay, land conservation, habitat protection. Tell us where you're at as an agency with some of those natural resource issues, and what are you hoping to accomplish in the coming administration?
All right, well, thank you, Russ. Again, the Department of Forestry, 2/3 of Virginia is covered in forest, and that's part of what makes Virginia, Virginia. I think the forest is a significant part of what makes up the Commonwealth. And 80% of that forest is owned by private individuals and private companies. So the Department of Forestry, our mission, our job is to help those landowners and land managers do the best job they can to sustainably manage the forest. So our role is to advise and encourage and educate and cajole and try to get people to do good management of the forest. So we're a little bit different, very small regulatory role, much more in the advise and assist role as an agency, and that's core to our mission. Job number one is forest fire prevention and suppression. So anyone here who goes to sleep at night and they don't worry about losing their home to a forest fire, you're welcome. You can thank the firefighters at the Department of Forestry for doing that. We've actually had a fairly busy spring fire season this year, and most of you probably aren't aware of that because we take care of that for you. So just wanted to recognize all the folks at DOF that are on call in the spring and the fall to respond to wildfire, and so really appreciate their efforts. We also, mission number 2 is to protect water quality during timber harvest. So every time somebody cuts timber, performs a timber harvest in Virginia, they have to call us, and we come out and we check to make sure that they're protecting water quality. They don't need a permit. It's a by right activity, but they do need to make sure that they're protecting water quality. And again, it's not a regulatory-driven process. We work in conjunction with the loggers, and we help them to find the best way to protect water quality. And the Bay goals for 2025, it's 95% compliance with those best management practices on timber harvest. We've been there for years. In the Chesapeake Bay watershed this year, we're at 96% compliance with best management practices. And that's looking at some of my southern state contemporaries, they have a higher BMP compliance rate, but they don't look at every single timber harvest. They look at the projects that are reported to them in some cases. And I'm guessing the projects that get reported to them are probably the better ones. So just guessing. So we're very proud of the fact that looking at every single timber harvest, and then we go back and we audit them again after they're closed out, 96% compliance with BMPs across the state. So the timber harvesting community in Virginia has achieved their Chesapeake Bay goal ahead of schedule, and we're very proud of that. One place where we are challenged is with the riparian buffer implementation. We are not on track to achieve that by 2025. So that's something that we'll be putting a lot more effort into in the next coming years. And we're looking forward to working with our partners on that.
Rob, one of the things I know that you've been interested in, obviously the agency has, and given the fact that 80% of the forest lands are in private ownership and fragmented lands, what sort of strategies does the department promote to try to conserve forest land? I mean, I guess cajole and other things, but I know the new state forests, and there are other strategies that you've undertaken to try to conserve the forest base. Are there anything, that in your hopes and dreams or, on the planning board where you think you can address some of those issues?
Yeah, so the Department of Forestry, again, sticking with that private land ownership, private land management mission and philosophy, we have placed a significant emphasis on conservation easements, and we are have become kind of the second biggest acceptor or holder of conservation easements in the state year after year. So we're very proud of our conservation easement program. One thing that I think I hope we can move forward as a state, we're very good at protecting individual parcels and identifying, if the battle occurred on this particular property, you've got to protect that particular property. If the cave entrance is on this particular property, you've got to protect that particular property. Forestry and farming, it's not so critical that you protect necessarily this farm versus that farm or that farm or that farm. What we need to protect is the essence of farming. We have to have enough farms to maintain, we have to have enough dairy farms to have a dairy industry. We have to have enough forest land to support mills and to protect water quality. So I hope as a state we can we can build on. We have to do parcel-based land protection, and we'll continue to do that. But I think what we need to do as a state is do a better job of looking at landscape scale protection. Especially for working lands. We have our land use taxation program, which is locality by locality. And in land use, the locality defers the tax revenue from working lands, farm, forest, and other protected lands and horticultural lands. And so, of course, every locality is looking for revenue. And one thing they look at is, hey, why are we giving these farmers and forest landowners a tax break? And so, I think we need to reflect the fact that that farm and that forest land are providing the air and the water and the habitat and the recreation and the aesthetics and the carbon sequestration that the rest of us count on. So I just hope we can get to a place where we can do a better job of looking at the entire landscape and protecting it rather than just looking at individual parcels, or as well as looking at individual parcels. We're really excited about the Forest Sustainability Fund legislation that was developed this year at the General Assembly as a potential way to reimburse localities for some of what they lose through providing that forest land use taxation. We're also looking at trying to get individual small landowners, bringing them together to access the carbon credit market. So again, that forest landowner and farmer in between harvests, they are providing water quality and clean air and carbon sequestration benefits without compensation for the most part. We need to get them compensated for those other values that they're providing. So.
Great, thank you very much, Rob. Matt, new kid on the block.
How are you?
Good.
You left me, man.
I know a little bit about DCR here, so obviously, as you're well aware, I think before you took this position, but becoming increasingly aware as you're now, 3 weeks into it? 2 weeks?
Week and a half.
Week and a half, oh my goodness. Well, I'll go easy on you then, man. DCR obviously has a broad portfolio of responsibilities from maintaining, essentially I keep saying we about DCR, but
okay.
They, are essentially a hotelier. We lodge and feed people. It's a land protection agency. It's a water quality management agency. It's a permitting agency when it comes to permitting and issuing certificates for dams and other impounding structures. What areas would you like to emphasize most, given that broad portfolio? And how do you make the kinds of decisions you need to make about prioritizing when all of those things are important to Virginia's natural resources?
Sure. Well, first of all, it's great to be here. I have been on the job for a week and a half, so these might be higher level. I do have our excellent staff here to throw things at me if I get off track and rescue me if I get in too deep. But look, at a high level, you're right. You know, DCR has a very, very broad mission. It is a very important mission. I think I want to talk a little bit about why I think it's important, because I think that drives what the critical parts of that are for me, right? So to me, our parks, our natural area preserves, the land that we conserve, you know, a lot like the forest that Rob talked about, that is the backbone of who we are as Virginia, right? That is the backbone of our quality of life. And at the same time, DCR as an agency is going to be on the front lines, I think, of some of the most significant environmental challenges of our time, you know, our bay, flooding, dams, resiliency. And so what I've told our staff is that DCR is very much an agency about the kind of Virginia that we can have today, but that what we do for the next 4 years will have an impact for decades and decades to come. And so it's an agency that's also very much about legacy. And so with that in mind, some of, I think, the bigger buckets of things that I intend to focus on, one is having a best-in-class park system. We're starting from a great base. We want to expand and enhance access, not just to our parks, but to the entire portfolio of outdoor offerings that the Commonwealth has to offer, and that means working with other agencies that have those assets as well. For the Bay, we obviously have an obligation to meet our 2025 WIP goals. On the dams, I think we've got a tremendous challenge, and I hope we have a few minutes to get into
Go ahead.
to both bays. So yeah, all right, so let's talk about dams.
There's no time like the present, Matt.
So in my previous job with a company called Westrock, Westrock owns one dam in Connecticut, one dam. By the way, if you would like to own a dam in Connecticut, I'm sure they would give you a great price on it. That one dam was
Don't buy a dam.
that one dam was the bane of my existence, and so I've gone from a job where I had to deal with one dam to a job where we have oversight over 2,700. Nearly 1,900 of those don't have a hazard classification, and that's not saying that a hazard classification basically says if the dam breaks, what happens, right? So we don't know what happens if it goes. We don't know who owns about 750 of those. So that is a big problem, especially when you consider that a lot of these dams were constructed in a time frame, you know, where they are about to reach in mass the end of their usable life, or we're going to have the great retirement for dams, and it's not like, you know, Russ goes off and rides his bike and the dam fails and the water comes down. So that's a big problem, and I came into this job aware of it, and I thought that this was going to be kind of, you know, an issue that we're going to have to work on to raise awareness, and then literally 2 hours into this job, I got a call. We've got a dam in Fluvanna. We think it's about to fail. It is upstream from a power plant. I'm like, okay. So thanks to excellent work by the staff, by our dam safety division, we worked with VDEM and VDOT, the locals, Dominion Power, and I was able to exercise some emergency authority to provide some funding thanks to the governor's involvement. I think we're in a good place on that particular dam. I think we've got it pretty stable, knock on wood. But, you know, we were pretty lucky this time, I think. You know, that's the way it looks, and luck is not a strategy. That's not, we can't count on that going forward. And, you know, people have been aware of this problem. I know a lot of people in this room have been aware of this problem. We've had multiple studies over better than a decade calling attention to the problem. And I will say that this administration intends to do something about that problem. And that's going to be a big lift, but it is something that we are committed to tackling because it is a problem. You asked about how I prioritize things, and priority number one is always going to be safety. And this is, I think, a tremendous risk for safety and for the economy of Virginia. So that's something that we want to tackle. And then I'll say flooding and resiliency. obviously is important. And that's not just for the Hampton Roads area, right? That covers the entire state. Southwest Virginia has significant issues with flooding. I also want to say that flooding and resiliency isn't redundant for me, right? Resiliency is much broader. It includes flooding, but it also includes things like land conservation, land habitat protection, right? It's how we protect the things that we care about from a natural resources perspective. So I think those are some of the external facing things. One internal facing thing that I want to make sure that we highlight is that we got to take care of our people. Right, we have a great team. We ask our folks to do a lot. We also have several openings, and we're a great place to. How many openings do we have, Lord? We have about 30 openings right now. Yeah. So I think we're better to work than DEQ. No. We have parks people. No, but look, we ask a lot out of our folks, and I want to make sure that we're treating them right and that we're doing right by them. So those are some of the things that I anticipate focusing on.
Great, thanks very much. Mike, I know that there's a couple of hot issues that you're interested in following up on.
I am.
First of all, I know there's been a lot of interest and talk and action and debate about the RGGI program, and I know that obviously that's something that DEQ does, but obviously a DCR has a key part in that, and DHR isn't, or the DHCD isn't here. They are also a player in the RGGI game as well. So if you wanted to talk a little bit about that, and I know also you were interested in talking a little bit about some of the stormwater related to solar facilities. So the floor is yours, Mr. Rolband.
Thank you, Russ. Mr. Baxter. So on RGGI, some people are curious as to what's going on, and we have posted on our website a report that was written by DEQ in conjunction with the Secretary of Natural Resources, and I volunteered to have Travis come and talk about this. but seriously, this report is now public. It is on the website. We've had a press release, and it was written in response to Executive Order 9. So the governor directed us to write a report and explain where RGGI stands and what would be the process to have Virginia leave RGGI. And the fundamental issue is simply that the electric bills, Dominion Power's petition to raise the bills, and they will be petitioning probably to raise them more if we continue, to cover the costs of RGGI. So RGGI has a good purpose. What's happened though is when the original studies were done to support joining RGGI, the conclusion in the DEQ report, and it's also linked in our website, was that there would be a nominal increase in electric rates. The reality is that the electric rates have gone up. And the reason is that the way it's structured now is that the cost of buying these credits is a pass-through cost to the consumer. So when the first study was done, the assumption was that these costs would be rebated through the SEC process back to the consumer, so they wouldn't be paying extra. A decision was made legislatively that instead of rebating these costs to the consumers, they would instead be used to fund programs, both at DCR and at the housing.
DHCD.
DHCD. Lots of acronyms.
I'm struggling with my acronyms after.
Yes. So the governor made a policy decision when he was campaigning and then implemented it through an executive order that said that we're not going to do that. We're not going to pass this cost to all the consumers. And the basic is it's a tax, and it's a regressive tax. So people have to, if you have a home and it has, poor insulation and poor electrical efficiency, you're going to be paying more. And a lot of those homes are people that can't afford it. So the question really is simply, how are we going to pay for these programs that are needed? Is it going to be paid through a general revenue where the taxes is less regressive than electric bills or not? So what we've done is simply write a report that explained the process and explain the process of how you would have to proceed to be removed from RGGI. That process has not started yet. That's a question that a lot of people are calling about. We have some meetings scheduled with the Attorney General's office, and it's not a simple process. And so, the story will continue, and we'll meet with the Attorney General's office and meet with the Secretariat and to follow through with the executive order. And I know there'll be a lot of angst, and I've already have one of those letters that says they're going to sue me. And so I'm sure there'll be lots of lawsuits, and it is what it is. I mean, we'll see how the system works. And the great thing about a democracy is that people are allowed to have different opinions. They can express them, and we have checks and balances in our systems, and we'll follow through and see what the results are.
Thanks.
So if
Go
I
ahead,
could
Matt,
just
I know
kind
you
of,
wanted to add on.
yeah, if I could just kind of piggyback on that from the DCR, and like Mike said, I understand there's a lot of disagreement in this room, people coming from different perspectives, and those of you who know me know that I've never shied away from a good policy discussion on things. But I think, to me, the important thing here is that we don't confuse the means with the end goal, right? RGGI is a means to an end. Just because we don't agree on the means doesn't mean that we disagree on the end. We agree on the end, right? This administration is committed to addressing resiliency. We are committed to funding these resiliency programs, to funding the fund, essentially. But we just don't believe that we should be funding these resiliency programs with a hidden tax. And again, I get it, that's a legitimate policy discussion, but at the end of the day, we're committed to the end goal. Right, and I know there's been a lot of questions about that. We're committed to the end goal. We're committed to funding these resiliency programs. We have a disagreement on the means. But as Mike laid out, this is a tax. These are ratepayer dollars. We think that there are other pots of money that are more appropriate to fund it. But at the end of the day, we want to get to the same place. And I think it's important not to lose sight of that.
And there's a good message also that's in our report, which is the carbon emissions from electrical production in Virginia has actually decreased over 50% in the last 10 years. So, and the Clean Economy Act is still in place. This isn't affecting the progress that we've made in the past, and it's not affecting the progress we'll be making in the future. So far, if you look at our report, the progress is primarily from the conversion of coal-fired facilities to gas-fired facilities. Nuclear has stayed about constant. Renewables are increasing, so that's also contributing. But we are making incredible progress. And I think yesterday Mike Dowd mentioned in the presentation, he showed the statistics on the air quality improvements. So we're making really good progress, and it's really a question is how do you fund this?
And tell me a little bit about stormwater on solar panels.
So one thing, so yesterday I talked about some of the ongoing problems of solar facilities and stormwater. And I mentioned that there was a letter going out to the industry, and it went out yesterday while I was talking. And I had approved it earlier in the morning. And I need to ask our communications department, Greg Bellio, to see if we can post that on our website if it's not done already. But it went out to the email list for construction general permits. And the issue is fundamental. All I'm saying is that solar panels are impervious, okay, which is physics. They are impervious. They're unconnected impervious. So if any type of modeling system you use for stormwater runoff, you do get an attenuation factor for having that water flow off a sheet and sheet flow onto the ground and across the ground. So we're not saying you don't get credit for that. You do get BMP credit for that, and you also get quantity control credit for that. But we're just saying you have to follow the regulations. The problem is that there's lots of downstream flooding and lots of downstream erosion problems from these projects that didn't account for that extra runoff. And the question is one of fairness. Do we think that it's important to have solar destroy downstream properties? And I think that everyone should be treated the same. The regulations are not changing. So one of the questions yesterday, I got a few phone calls. One of the questions posed to me, is it fair to make us have to control our stormwater management? And so the retort, or the other side, is it fair for you to not follow existing regulations? One of them that's been in place since 1992, Minimum Standard 19 in the VESH handbook, which was a DCR product, and they shunted it over to us. But
Okay, you gave us dams.
That's a regulation, and it's been enforced for 30 years now. So to not follow existing regulations, and there was no guidance and no regulations saying anything changed. It's simply somehow the industry was able to get previous administration to make a determination that the posts and the beams that support the panel are impervious, but not the panel itself. And if you ever go look at a solar panel, and I have a bunch on my farm on ground mount, if you stand underneath it when it rains, you do not get wet.
This guy is a scientist,
Science.
let me tell you.
Bill Nye.
By the way, Bill Nye also went to Cornell, and 1 year ahead of me, and he's a great guy. Last year he gave a talk, and it was great. He says about his career. It was a career day, so I had a talk, and he had a talk. He's a much more fun talker, and he says it's very simple. You know, you just get a mechanical engineering degree, you go work at Boeing as an aerospace, and you at moonlight at night in comedy clubs, and then you become Bill Nye the Science Guy. Okay. That's his career path, but I didn't do that.
Yeah, don't quit your day job. Mike.
Yeah, I won't. I already quit my day job. This is retirement. And I'm having a blast. But anyway, back to the solar. So it's a really interesting question. You know, yes, it's not fair in certain ways, you could say, to change direction. But the direction we changed was simply say you have to follow the existing rules. We didn't change the rules. We're just saying you have to follow them. So it is more costly, and over my career, I have listened to every client complain about the cost of stormwater regulation. I've heard about every industry, the school boards that used to get exceptions, and they built schools without stormwater for a while because it cost money and you were taking money from the kids. Well, if this requirement is a good requirement, and so far in Virginia we've wanted it for over 30 years, then it should be applied to everybody. You know, to me, it's very cut and dry, very simple, and we'll see what happens. You know?
Great, thanks, Mike. Maybe one sort of non-natural resource. I'm very sensitive to our time here. Got a few more minutes, but each of you have mentioned it, and I think it's something that maybe takes some broader discussion, and that is just honestly filling out the positions in your agency, maintaining staff, helping staff advance in state government. That's always been an issue. The only way you advance in state government is to get a different job, and sometimes you don't want a different job, but you want the more money that comes along with it. And so I'm just curious, Rob, maybe you could start what do you see for the state workforce, for the employees of your department, not only recruiting, but, keeping the folks that you have on board, because as everybody else out here knows, a lot of this work doesn't get done without people in those chairs. So
Right.
I wonder if you might talk about that a little bit.
All right, thank you, Russ. Well, I guess I could say the Department of Forestry is a better place to work than DCR, DEQ, because we don't have nearly that many empty positions. I think, right now we're in the, whatever they call this, the resignation age, or people can go to find another job so easily. I think that cuts both ways for us. We're the place that those people want to come. I mean, all of us, natural resources, all of us in natural resources. If you are doing a job just to do a job and it's not satisfying to you and you want to go and find something that has meaning, we're that place. I mean, we are, protecting, restoring, preserving the natural resources. So I think we have a great opportunity now to give people jobs that have meaning, and public service, and being able to be outdoors, and being able to go home at the end of the day and tell your family the animal you saw in the woods that day. So I think we have a great opportunity to give people jobs that fill that potential void when folks have the opportunity now. It's also a great time, fortunately, to be in state government. I was cleaning out some files in the office last week and looking at the things that we had to do in 2008 and 2009 and 2010 and repeatedly in years after that, where there were 5%, 10%, 15%, 2%, 5%, 7% budget cut scenarios. And those were just absolutely brutal times when there were no good decisions to be made. Right now we have some great opportunities. We're getting additional positions. We got a new position last year to head up our hardwood management program. I wasn't going to get out of here without talking about hardwood forestry. And then also a watershed position, and right now we're hiring 3 watershed regional positions to help us with that riparian buffer issue. So I think right now for the state, we're in about as good a place as we can be. And I think that, as to your point of the promoting people in place, and I love that, foresters say, just as Russ said, I don't want a promotion. I don't want a different job. I want to keep being a forester. I like serving landowners. I like being able to set my own schedule. But my family is growing, and I need more income. And so that has always been a challenge. But we have been developing more. In the old days, a DOF forester did everything. Arbor Day, Smokey Bear, fight fires, help landowners with management, look at loggers. We're getting into more specialization now where folks can find the part of that job that really speaks to them and do that on a little bit of a broader geography. And so that has given us an opportunity to let folks move up within the agency and yet continue to do the things that are meaningful to them. So, and I think the other big challenge is, that we all face are, diversifying the folks that work for our agencies so we look like the population that we serve, and so that we are more welcoming to the population that we serve, and that is a
I know that DCR has been very much involved with those efforts, DEQ as well, and I'm glad you brought that up because we're running out of time. But I was going to talk about that as well. If you guys want to add anything to what Rob said.
Just one thing. I mean, DEQ is facing an interesting situation in that they were created roughly 30 years ago, and so there's a surge of people that are retiring.
Yeah.
And so that's providing a unique opportunity, plus they have more funding. So they had all these cutbacks for years. Now all of a sudden they have more funding, and we have to, we have more positions, plus there's a lot of people retiring. And I know some of the federal agencies, in the environmental area, that's pretty common. There's a whole bunch of people that started their careers in the early genesis of environmental protection, and we're aging out.
Yeah.
And even me. So that's a big challenge, to support, train, develop the staff, and get them broad-based.
Yeah, I guess and Rob and Mike have made a lot of the points that I would make too. I would say this is my second tour of duty with the state. I was at the Department of Motor Vehicles and Department of Alcoholic Beverage Control in 5-6 years ago, and I'm familiar with the obstacles to growth within an agency. Right, you see people hop around back and forth because that's the only way you can really get a pay bump. But one thing that I really want to focus on is career development opportunities for our people. I want them to be able to grow, but just to kind of give you the sense of the end state that I want to get to, when it was announced that I was taking this job, I can't tell you how many people, and that includes a lot of the people that are in this room, came up to me and said, "Matt, you are getting the best job in Virginia state government." and I tend to agree with them, otherwise I wouldn't have taken the job. Sorry, guys. But what I have said is that is what I want for every person that works for DCR. I want, when they tell their friends who they work for, or when they tell their parents, I'm going to go work for DCR, I want the response to be, you're getting the best job in Virginia state government.
That's great.
So that's what we want to get to.
Well, I'm afraid that my watch tells us that we're out of time. Man, 45 minutes goes by fast. Or an hour, I guess it's been since we started. So first of all, I would like to thank each of our panelists. If you'd give them all a round of applause.
Nice work, guys.
I know it's having lived through many changes of administration. It's a scary, but it's also a time for opportunity. And so I think everybody in this room, myself included, wishes you all the best, wishes the administration the best to really make a difference in Virginia. So thank you for being here. Thanks for supporting this conference. And I think everybody's going to go get a cup of coffee and start attending sessions. So thank you very much, everyone.